Hello, Zimbabwe. Welcome to Livetalk Diaspora Forum, a platform where we discuss issues affecting Zimbabweans in the diaspora. We're coming to you from Studio 7 at the Voice of America in Washington. I am Kip Stube. Tonight on Live Talk, we are discussing the fate of holders of Zimbabwean exemption permits following a court challenge of a Pretoria High Court, a ruling that the South African government had when it terminated the special program. Namhla sixoxa ngodaba lwama-Zimbabwe special exemption permits kulandela okwenziwe ngele South Africa elithi akuqondanga ukuthi ukwethulwa ngumthethwandaba owe-Pretoria High Court owathi abaphathintambo bakahulumende bengalunganga ukuthi babemise ukusebenza kwamaphepha lawo. Sizaxoxa njalo la ngomhlangano omkhulu we-United Nations General Assembly. But first, let's take a look at what is happening at the United Nations General Assembly attended by world leaders, including President Emmerson Mnangagwa. The Zimbabwean leader, still smarting from a disputed election, told delegates to a high-level meeting on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response in New York today that after grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic, Zimbabwe has made strides in building back stronger healthcare systems.
The toll of HIV and COVID-19 pandemics continues to result in loss of human life, disruption to households and livelihoods, while impacting negatively on economies and development. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, Zimbabwe has made strides to build back stronger and more resilient healthcare systems that are able to identify and contain public health emergencies. Our country is further strengthening infection prevention and control practices and integrating the interventions into emergency prevention, preparedness, and response. We have also promoted the local manufacturing of health-related commodities and consumables. A major development in Zimbabwe was the establishment of our own local oxygen gas manufacturing plant. Your Excellencies, through the whole of government, whole of society, multi-stakeholder and multi-sectorial approach, Zimbabwe is on track to achieving the HIV 95 targets. Globally, there is need to have collaborative surveillance and access to countermeasures and emergency coordination between and among countries. Zimbabwe continues to work with regional and global partners in public health emergencies and the implementation of international health regulations 2005 to limit the spread of health risks. Your Excellencies, I urge us to make bold decisions that respond to present realities, including the development of the pandemic treaty, drawing lessons learned during the pandemics faced so far. Issues of the equitable distribution of resources to ensure equity in technologies like vaccines, personal protective equipment, information, expertise, and access to health care for all during pandemics need our honest consideration. There is clearly a need for stronger action, governance, financing, and health systems to protect the world from future pandemics. As Zimbabwe, my government has deliberately continued to increase budgetary allocations to health service delivery. In conclusion, I implore us to remain alive to the importance of robust monitoring mechanisms for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response for breaking the recycling cycle of pandemic panic and neglect. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
That was President Emmerson Mnangagwa speaking at a health symposium on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly here in New York. At the same time, in his address at the United Nations General Assembly today, Namibian President Hage Geingob said the West should remove targeted sanctions imposed on Cuba, Zimbabwe, and other nations. President Cyril Ramaphosa made similar remarks at the same event yesterday.
Punitive measures imposed for over half a century on the Republic of Cuba have brought untold hardships that have disenfranchised the Cuban people. The embargo against the Cuban people remains unjust and must therefore be lifted. Namibia appeals to the United States of America to remove the Republic of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, as there is no evidence to support such classification. Selective punitive measures against Zimbabwe and Venezuela must also be lifted, as these measures constitute the greatest obstacle to the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
South Africa continues to call for the lifting of the economic embargo that was imposed 60 years ago against Cuba, an embargo that has caused untold damage to the country's economy and the people of Cuba as well. The sanctions that are also being applied against South Africa's neighbor, Zimbabwe, should also be lifted, as they are imposing untold suffering on ordinary Zimbabweans, but also have a collateral negative impact on neighboring countries as well, such as my own country, South Africa.
That was South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Namibian President Hage Geingob speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. And back to the topic of the day. The Supreme Court on Monday reserved judgment in a case in which Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi was challenging a ruling in June this year by the Pretoria High Court, in which it declared as invalid the termination of the Zimbabwe exemption permits. The South African government initially gave Zimbabwean holders of these permits up to the end of June this year to regularize their status, but later extended the deadline to December 2023. Those who would have failed to get new visas to stay and work in South Africa faced deportation. However, the Pretoria High Court declared the move as illegal, noting that there were no proper consultations with all stakeholders before the South African government made the decision to terminate the program. The Helen Suzman Foundation spearheaded the court challenge against the government's decision to stop the scheme. Many holders of the Zimbabwe exemption permits say they now fear that they may be deported if they don't regularize their status by June 30 next year, as per the Pretoria High Court ruling. Joining us to discuss this issue, we have Ms. Victress Matutu of Zim Imbogoto, Mr. Munjozi Mutandiri, a Senior Programs Manager of the Southern African Liaison Office, and Mr. Ngabuto Mapena, Chairperson of the Zimbabwe community in South Africa. Welcome to the program. So let's start with you, Ms. Matutu. What's your take on what the South African government is doing now in terms of challenging the Pretoria High Court decision on the Zimbabwe exemption permits? Matutu?
Hello, Mr. Dube. How are you?
No, Siapila, how are you? So give us your take on what is going on.
I'm also good. Dube, if we all remember well that the court decision that was taken on the 28th of June this year gave the ZEP holders 1 year. I think it gave the Home Affairs a year to talk to ZEP holders and come with another decision. After that, the minister gave the ZEP period of up to 30 September 2023. Now we are hearing that the Minister of Home Affairs is appealing the court ruling. Which means if the minister is appealing the court ruling, the court ruling of the 28th of June 2023 that was given by the court for the ZEP holder to hear, or for the Home Affairs to talk to the ZEP holders and the stakeholders that are involved in this. This is also maybe ruled out because now the minister is appealing. Just no direction on this. No, whether the grace period will end on the 31st of December this year or the ruling by the court still stands. But by the look of the minister is appealing, then the thing, I don't think it still stands. So now we are sitting here with the minister's grace period that is on the 31st of December this year.
Mm-hmm. So I think you are facing that kind of a problem. Mr. Mutandiri, what's the impact of this challenge on Zimbabwean exemption permit holders? Mr. Mutandiri, can you hear me?
Hi, my brother. How are you?
No, very fine. How are you doing? So, what's the impact of this kind of court challenge on the Zimbabwean exemption permit holders?
Good evening to you and to your listeners. And my line is a bit bad, and I'm hoping that you are able to hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So the big challenge is that legally, once the minister challenges, it sort of suspends the court ruling which had given the reprieve to the ZEP holders. But we saw that the Helen Suzman Foundation has gone back to court to say that even if the minister challenges, can the court consider that those who are holders of the ZEP remain legal until the court has made a final ruling on the issue. So the impact is that it puts most of the holders in limbo in terms of understanding what exactly is happening, but also it creates confusion within the workplace where these people are working, within the banking sector. We begin to see banks again because of the confusion, closing some accounts, and this naturally impacts on these holders. But also the bigger impact is that it brings back the spotlight on the issues of migration broadly in South Africa, and because we are going towards an election process, the lack of leadership from the political leadership, particularly the Minister of Home Affairs, and I mean leadership that is decisive, humane, but also within the bounds of the Constitution and the laws of this country. It a lot of pressure on people to take the law into their own hands. It sort of fuels the reactionary organizations like the Dula and many others, especially political parties that have roared on this issue of migration to really just target, particularly Zimbabweans. So one of the...
okay. Thank you very much. At this stage, let me bring in Mr. Mapena. So keep on holding there, Mr. Mutandiri. So, Mr. Mapena, are these holders, making any contingency plans as we speak right now, in ensuring that if the court challenge succeeds, they will know what to do next?
If the court challenge were to go through, though I seem not to understand your question, because as the two speakers have already explained, the court process, what is currently happening is that people are applying for waivers, but of great concern is that the people that applied in 2021, 2022 are still not getting their waivers. You have a serious challenge at the Department of Home Affairs in terms of making decisions or giving out the outcome of those that will have applied. The court process is going to be a long, drawn-out court process. This is why Mojoz was explaining to you why Helen Suzman Foundation has to go to court, because what we saw this week was the Minister of Home Affairs going to the High Court in Pretoria to seek leave to appeal. If he gets granted the leave to appeal, it means he will then go to the Supreme Court of Appeal. If they lose, they are likely to go to the Constitutional Court. So it's a long-drawn court process, unless, of course, if the High Court in Pretoria then says it does not believe that another court, a higher court, will come to a different conclusion than they did. So it will then mean that he will not then have the right to appeal, meaning that the judgment then gets implemented. So what Mujoz was basically saying was that the appeal by the minister suspends the implementation of that judgment, which was passed on the 28th of June 2023.
Precisely. So just hold on there. Let's take a caller right now. I think we've got a caller on the line. Caller, hello, siyamukela khona apha ecingweni ngikhuluma lobani? Ikhola ungazani kumbe ucingo lwayo lungani lusaphansi sazi ukuthi lumi njani. Sathi sibuyele khona apha kukhola. Let's just take a very short break. Stay tuned. We are coming back very shortly. So I think maybe the caller was going to come on board, but still we're trying to get the caller, and we are going to maybe take a break. But I'm told that we can continue with some of our cases. So back to you, Miss Victoria Matutu ngesindebele. So kwenzakalani khona manje nxa sikhangela ukuthi ikhoti ithi singathi uhulumende we South Africa uthi khona okwenziwa iPretoria High Court kungazani kabahambelani lakho. Lina khonapho ke selisemnyameni onganani ngokuzalandela khonapho?
Duba sisemnyameni omkhulu. Omnyameni omkhulu kakhulu uba bhena echaza lapho ukuthi uhulumende legatsha lapha beqhubeka ngokuthi bayephilisana lesinqumo senkantolo asikwazi ukuyazi kuphethe ngaphi. So kungathatha isidoni sokuthatha iminyaka songathatha isikhathi esingakwaziyo ukuthi ngesikhathi kusayenziwa wonke lokhu ukuthi kube kuzama ukuthi kuphile isinqumo senkantolo kuzobe kuthibani ngathi ngoba asatshela ukuthi kasiqhubeke si-aplayela ama-waiver. Abantu bayo-aplayela ama-waiver sijalo lo sipho futhi lokuthi bakhona si-aplayile kuthule balutshwana abantu abakhuluma ngokuthi bayayithola imiphumela. Njalo singakhumbula ukuthi uku-aplaya ama-waiver akusikho ukuthi uma kuphuma i-waiver kuphuma i-permit entsha. Qhubeka futhi phambili si-aplayele ngaso waiver si-aplayela ama-permit ezingakwaziyo futhi ukuthi nxathatha i-waiver ithatha isikhathi eside kangaka ukuthi ize sithole umphumela pho mase kuyi-permit izothatha isikhathi esinganani. So njengoba ngapha si-aplaya lokhu oku-aplaya ngapha kulezi nkantolo ezihanjwa asisakwazi ukuthi okuyikho kumele sikwenze kuphi silinde izinkantolo kumbe siqhubeke ngoku-aplaya lokho okutshiwoyo ngokuphumela kwezinkantolo sonke asiwazi ukuthi ekuqineni kwakho kuzagcina kuthiweni ngoba kukhanya kulokudonsela lokungavumelani thizeni okukhona. So sisemnyameni kakhulu Dube emnyameni esingawaziyo mpela ukuthi ngumnyama esizaqhubeka sikuwo kuze kube nini.
Yeah, ubambe khonapho ke ungakatshana. Let's get Mr. Mutandiri. So Mr. Mutandiri nerumi mai in Shona. So what should people do at this stage? Since it seems as if many people are now confused on what to do next. In Shona, banbaite say kanazwale.
Yeah, so ndambotaura paya kuti ndikustruggle kundira ishomo. So I think the question is kuti vanhu voita sei?
Yeah, ndiyo question yacho. Yeah, ndiyo question yacho.
Tinotenda, thanks. So I think parizvino patingagone kukurudzira vanhu kutanga nevemaholders emaZPP ndechekuti vanhu vasanyanye kupanika ndava alawo ma-court procedure ainge but I think zvinofanira kuitika zvagara zviri kutongoitikawo kuramba tichitsawo particularly ve-home affairs nemhaka yekuti maprocess acho haasi kufamba nekuchimbidza. Atingi vamabhena vataura kuti tine dambudziko rekuti kune vanhu vakatanga kuaplaya kuti vawane mawaiver, kuti vawane mapepa, variniwe mapemiti avo sezvanga zvambodomwa negurukota rehome affairs vaMotsoaledi. Asi tichiona kuti kunenge kune dambudziko kuhome affairs yecapacity kana kuti yekugona kuchimbidza maprocess ekuti mapepa abude. So I think tofanira kuti timirire kuti judgment yecourt inoti chii panhau yeveHelen Suzman. But chikuru ndechekuti hurumende yeSouth Africa ngaivewo considerate, ine hurumende inotevera maprocesses anoalawa yatingati natural justice here, kuti vanhu ngavapiwe mukana. Tisaite sekuti kuda kupunyikidzirana, kuda kukaurisana, kuti munotokaura chete, dzokerai kunyika dzenyu. Zvine upenyu hwevanhu, vanhu vagara kwenguva yakareba. So tinoramba tichitaura navo, tichizama kuti aiwa ngationesanei, ngaigadziriswe nyaya iyi nenzira kwayo.
Thank you, Mr. Mtandi. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you. You just hold on there. Sibona zanisile khola kunjani icingweni? Ngalo khola uyangizwe icingweni khona ngapha. Namhla yes, sabona kunjani?
Ngiyaphila.
Akuzitsho igama lesibongo baba Sizwe khonapha.
Igama nguyentati isibongo sakweNcube baba.
Ncube ubona njani udaba lolu sixoxa ngalo namhlanje?
Udaba lolu ngathi luthanda ukuba nzima kakhulu. Yithi thina abantu esebenzisa ama-permit ngobunengi ngoba ngathi nje kothi yehluleke ukuluqondisa kahle lolu daba. Mina ngubona kwami ngibona ngathi nje lapha vele into nje ezogcina ifeyilile le ngokuhamba kwesikhathi.
So manje ubona zani uzayenzani wena njengoba lamaphepha lawo?
Kuzaba nzima kakhulu ukuthi ngenze njani ngoba kuzabe sokubhale bona phezulu.
So amaphepha kade sona uyadinga kumbe siwagcina usekela nje?
Manje nami ngiku-waiting, ngilindile ukuthi ngizwe ukuthi kuhamba njani khona ngale nami ngikwazi ukuthi ngithole lelo phepha.
Kulo ncedo oludingayo yini ongalithola ebantwini abakhangela konke lokho?
Yiyo le permit.
Usukwadi ngaphi kwakhona?
Sengike ngazama le debate izip. Hayi nayo yavele nje yehlula nje efonini khonapho nje waphela kanjani.
So wena kodwa uyithwele iziphu lokhu layo wazama ukuthi renew uthole nja?
Ngazama ukuthi ngirenew ngithole entsha wehlula ukuthi ngirenew ngasala lokho ngibambele nahle.
Hayi siyakuzwa kakhulu eNcube baba ungathola kusasa baba.
Hayi siyabonga baba.
So Mr. Mapena, I think we can hear one of the callers talking about his predicament there. What can he do, and what can others do in such a situation? Mr. Mapena?
When a person should apply for a waiver, because the majority of the ZEP holders do not qualify to move to other visas, so one needs a waiver. Once one has been granted a waiver, then they apply for a general work visa. But of course, we understand the challenges that ZEP holders are having, where people that have been working, but during COVID they lost their jobs. They need to submit a proof of employment when they apply or submit their applications. They do not have that proof of employment, so it becomes a challenge. Secondly, we've been seeing some letters that the employer should be writing, mostly that are working as domestic workers, are finding it difficult to get their employers to confirm that indeed they work for them, because there is now this perception that employers will then commit that if anything happens, they are then responsible for a deportation, which of course is not, it should not be correct, because then if a person applies for a permit, they get rejected, it should not be the burden of the employer to deport the person. In any case, we've been arguing that you have more people who are not documented, who are working than holders of the Zimbabwe exemption permit. So, yeah, but these are some of the challenges that people are having. And we have been speaking to Nedbank because Nedbank has been closing people's accounts on the basis that they are people do not have permits. We still have this challenge. We have not been able to resolve that because we have been trying yesterday to speak to their legal department at head office. There's no meeting of minds at the moment, but those that are affected, we are trying our level best to assist so that people do not have their accounts frozen. But the normal procedure is that a person will simply download the statement that speaks of the grace period and then hand over to their bank branch so that their monies are not frozen.
Is there any person that is assisting most of these people in processing their applications as it is right now?
There are many people who have who are now entrepreneurs who are assisting people. There are people that are assisting for free, and then there are others that are charging a small fee for assisting people. There are quite a number of people, organizations assisting individuals. Some employers do contact us asking for information on how to assist to apply for their. Some employers to apply for their employees. Yeah, so people are being assisted.
Thank you, Mr. Ngabutoma Pena. Let's take a caller. We've got a caller on the line. Caller, kunjani Cengwane?
How are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good, sir.
Yeah. Any contribution to the discussion today? What do you think about the Zimbabwe exemption permits and what the South African government is doing?
Oh, yeah, I heard that the minister is appealing the decision. You know, we live in an era whereby, especially in South Africa, where there is so much unemployment. But I think they looked at it from their side. They didn't look at it from a broader perspective. Because originally I come from Zim. If we look at it from a neutral perspective, in Zim also, as a local citizen, there were things that I didn't want to do as a local citizen. So now, if only the minister can look at such things that even maybe this thing was a way of trying to create jobs for the locals. But if you check even the locals, those spaces that they created when they want to terminate the permit, or when they terminated the permits, they are trying to create jobs for the locals. But you discovered those very jobs that are done by the foreigners, especially Zimbabweans, the locals don't want them. But they don't even want to get to that.
So there is a problem there, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, there is a huge problem, and some decisions, when you are in government or you are part of the government, you don't have to do them emotionally. You've got to sit down, collect data.
Thank you so much. Shepard, only that the time has gone beyond what we can handle today. If it was soccer, we're going to give you some extra time, but there's no extra time here. That brings us to the end of our show today. We'd like to thank our guests and, of course, you, the listeners and viewers at home. Signing off is Kip Stuber in Washington, D.C. Good night, Zimbabwe.